Device performance validated against arterial reference across patient populations, which is why the protocol can be trusted at the point of triage.
Dr. Moon, the study you are citing is 19 pages. The version in your regulatory file is 11.
Let her finish.
Why does a woman stand up in a lecture hall of 300 people to contradict the man whose foundation is paying her tuition? What was in the 8 pages that were cut out of a study before it was published? And why had she kept the notebooks for 5 years? Why did the most powerful man in that room go quiet when she said the words page 19? And how had Moon Hye-chan spent 2 years quoting a paper in every presentation he gave, in 6 countries, without ever once knowing who had actually written it? Because 11 weeks after that morning, the same man would stand at the same lectern and read a correction out loud, and the first name on it would not be his. This is her story, and it starts 21 years earlier in the staff break room of a hospital in Baltimore, with a girl doing her homework on a plastic table. Delphine Sutton cleaned the surgical floor at Mercy from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. She could not afford a sitter, and she would not leave her daughter home alone. So Nayla came to work with her and slept in the break room on 2 chairs pushed together with a coat over her. Nobody at that hospital ever reported it. The night nurses fed her. A surgical resident named Belle taught her to play chess. The charge nurse kept a drawer with crayons in it that was, officially, for nobody. And when Nayla was 8, she started reading the whiteboard. Not the words, the columns. The board tracked bed numbers and vitals, and Nayla learned to read a saturation reading before she learned long division, because it was on the wall and she was bored, and 8-year-olds will read anything that is in front of them. "That one's wrong," she said one night, pointing at a number. The charge nurse looked and laughed, and then stopped laughing, and went and checked, and the probe on that patient's finger had slipped. Nobody made a fuss about it, because it was a small thing. But Delphine Sutton stood in the doorway with a mop in her hand and watched 3 registered nurses take her 8-year-old seriously for about 40 seconds, and something in her chest rearranged itself permanently. "You're going to be a doctor," she said in the car. "Okay," said Nayla, who was 8 and did not know it was a hard thing to say. 21 years is a long story told quickly. Public school, then a state scholarship, then 4 years of undergraduate biology paid for by a job at a pharmacy counter, then 2 years of research assistant work because medical school in America costs more money than her family had ever seen in one place. She was 24 when the email came. The Moon Foundation International Scholarship, funded by the Moon Group of Seoul, covering full tuition and a stipend at Sierra University College of Medicine, for candidates from underrepresented backgrounds in medicine. Nayla read it 4 times and then called her mother at 2 in the morning. "Korea," said Delphine, in the voice of a woman recalculating an entire future in real time. "Korea. You don't speak Korean. I'll learn Korean." She learned Korean. Nayla Sutton landed at Incheon in the February she turned 25 with 1 suitcase, a laptop, and a printed acceptance letter she did not put away for 3 days because she wanted to be able to look at it. She took a room in Hyewa, 4 stops from the medical campus, above a stationery shop, with a window that faced a wall. She was the only black student in a class of 180. That is not a complaint, and she never made it one. It is simply the number, and the number has consequences. And one of the consequences is that nobody ever has to look for you in a photograph. The first year was survival. The second year she was placed in a laboratory. Every CRN student does a research placement. Every CR student does a research placement, And Nayla's was in the clinical instrumentation lab of Dr. Jin Woo, who was 52 then, well-published, well-connected, and running a validation study on behalf of a company that made bedside monitors. The device was a pulse oximeter. It is the small clip that goes on your finger in a hospital and reads how much oxygen is in your blood. And it works by shining light through your fingertip and measuring what comes out the other side. It is on every ward in every country on Earth. And it has a known problem, which is that skin absorbs light, And different skin absorbs light differently. And a device calibrated mostly on light skin can read a little high on dark skin. A little high sounds harmless. A little high means a patient can look fine on the monitor while not being fine. And in a triage queue, looking fine is what decides who waits. Dr. G's study was supposed to check exactly this. It ran for 14 months, and the person who ran it day to day at the bench, on nights and weekends, was the research assistant. Nayla recruited the cohort. She built the skin tone scale into the intake form herself when she noticed the standard form did not have one. She ran 260 paired measurements against arterial blood gas, which is the reference standard and the only honest way to answer the question. She kept everything in 5 hardbound laboratory notebooks, in blue ink, dated and initialed at the bottom of every page, because that is what her undergraduate advisor in Baltimore had drilled into her, and she had never stopped. And in the 11th month she found it. The device did not fail across the board. It failed at the edges, in low perfusion conditions, and it failed there specifically and measurably more often in the darkest skin tone bracket, which was also the bracket with the fewest participants because it always is. The finding was real, it was modest, and it was exactly the kind of thing that gets a device relabeled rather than recalled. Nayla wrote it up. 19 pages. 3 tables and 2 figures, one of which was a scatter plot she redrew 4 times because she wanted it to be impossible to misread. She gave it to Dr. Gu in March, and he told her it was very good work. He meant it. That is the part people find hardest to believe afterwards. The paper came out 11 months later in a respectable journal, and Nayla opened it on a laptop in a room in Hiwa at 1 in the morning, and read it again. It was 11 pages. Table 3 was gone. Both figures about skin tone were gone. The limitation was still there, in the discussion, in a single sentence, phrased so mildly that it read like a formality. And the author list had 4 names on it, and none of them were hers. She was in the acknowledgments. The lab thanks N. Sutton for technical assistance. She sat with that for a long time. Then she did the arithmetic that every 26-year-old in that position does. She was a second-year medical student on an international scholarship funded by a Korean conglomerate, on a visa tied to her enrollment, with no money, no citizenship, no advisor other than the man whose name was first on the paper, and no institutional standing whatsoever. She had a complaint, and she had absolutely no ability to survive making it. So she did the only thing she could actually do, which was nothing, loudly to herself for a very long time. Except for one thing. She went to the lab on a Sunday, and she photographed every page of all 5 notebooks, front and back, 460 images, and she uploaded them to 2 different places and mailed a copy on a drive to her mother in Baltimore with a note that said, "Do not open this, just keep it." Delphine Sutton put it in the fireproof box with the birth certificates and did not ask a single question, which is its own kind of love. What Nayla did not know yet was that the 11-page version of her study was already being read, in a different building, by people who had never heard her name. Or that within 2 years it would be the single most cited document in a company's entire regulatory file. 3 years went past the way medical school goes past, which is to say entirely and without anyone noticing. Nayla was 29 and in her final clinical year when she saw the poster. It was a Tuesday in April, in the 3rd floor corridor of Sierran Medical Center, between the lifts and the vending machines, and she walked past it twice before her brain caught up with her feet and made her go back. It was a display board for the hospital's new emergency triage protocol. Munchin Bio, the healthcare arm of the Moon Group, had supplied the monitors and co-authored the protocol, and the board was the kind of thing a company puts up when it is proud. Clean layout, company colors. A photograph of a nurse smiling at a screen. And in the bottom right corner, a small figure. A scatter plot. Nayla stood in that corridor and looked at a graph she had drawn 4 times with her own hands 5 years earlier, redrawn in someone else's software, in someone else's colors, with the axes relabeled. It was hers. She knew the shape of her own data the way you know a handwriting. Under it, a caption. Device performance validated against arterial reference across patient populations. The figure they had used to say that was the figure she had made to say the opposite. Not the whole figure, The top half of it. The bracket that carried the finding, the darkest tone group, the one with the widest error bars, had simply been cropped out of the bottom of the image. Nyla's hands did not shake, and her breathing did not change. And she went upstairs and did a 4-hour rotation on a respiratory ward and did it well. That evening she photographed the poster with her phone. At an angle, quickly, the way you photograph something you are not sure you are allowed to photograph. She did not tell anyone for 9 days. The first thing she went looking for, she found in a public database in about 40 minutes. Every medical device sold in that country has a regulatory file, and most of that file is public. And Nyla had spent 5 years learning exactly how to read a document. The München bedside monitor had been cleared 4 years earlier. The clearance rested on a small number of pivotal studies, and the pivotal study on accuracy, the one the whole file leaned on, was the 11-page paper with 4 names on it and hers in the acknowledgments. Hers, 14 months of it. 260 paired measurements. Cited as evidence for a claim it did not make. She sat back in her chair in the library at 11 at night and understood, for the first time, that this was not about credit. Credit was the small version of the problem. The large version was that a device was in 11,000 hospital beds, and the document that had gotten it there was missing the 8 pages that said where it fails. The final piece she did not have to hunt for, because it was on page 4 of the company's own submission summary in bold as a headline claim. Validated across the full range of patient skin tones. Nyla read that sentence 11 or 12 times. It was not a lie. Exactly. It was worse than a lie. It was true of a study that had been cut in half, and the half that made it untrue was sitting in 5 hardbound notebooks in a storage box under her bed in Hiwa. She met Moon Hye-chan for the first time 3 weeks later, and it was completely unremarkable. The Moon Foundation held a reception every spring for its scholarship recipients, in a room with good catering, and the students stood in a line and were photographed. And this is a thing every scholarship student on Earth has done. Nyla was 31st in the line. Hye-chan was 37, ran München Bio, and had the specific stillness of a man who had been the least interesting person in every room of his childhood and had decided to make that useful. He shook her hand and asked what she was going into. Emergency medicine. Why? Nobody had ever asked her that at one of those receptions. They asked what, not why. Because in the emergency department nobody gets to choose who walks in, Nyla said. Hye-chan looked at her for a second longer than the line allowed. Then he took a small black notebook out of his inside pocket, wrote something in it, closed it, and put it back. Thank you, he said, and moved on, and the photographer took the photograph, and that was the entire first meeting. She found out later what the notebook was. He wrote down every question he could not answer and every sentence he did not understand. And then he went and found out, and he had been doing it since he was 19, and there were 41 of those notebooks in a drawer in his office. It was, without any question, the best thing about him. It was also the reason what happened in October was so hard for her to forgive. The department ran a research seminar on the first Thursday of every month, and in October the topic was the triage protocol, and Dr. Ju Jin-woo presented it, and the room held about 60 people. Nyla sat in the 4th row and waited through 50 minutes. Then, in the question period, she raised her hand and asked a completely neutral, completely technical question. She asked whether the accuracy data behind the protocol had been stratified by skin tone, and if so, whether the stratified tables were available, because she had not been able to find them in the published version. The room went slightly quiet in the way rooms do. Dr. Gio smiled at her. They were considered and found not to be significant, he said. Which happens. Not every hypothesis a student is excited about survives the analysis. There was a small ripple of laughter. Not cruel. Worse than cruel. Comfortable. I understand the enthusiasm, he added. It is a fashionable question in America. And Nyla, who had run those measurements herself for 14 months, said, I'd still like to see the tables. And that is when Moon Hye-chan, sitting in the 2nd row, turned halfway around in his seat and said, mildly, without any malice at all, Dr. Jiu is the principal investigator. If he says the analysis was done, the analysis was done. We can move on. He did not take out the notebook. That is the detail she thought about for months afterwards. He had a system for not knowing things, and he had built his entire life on it. And in the one moment when it would have cost him 11 seconds to use it, he backed the man with the title. The room moved on. Nyla sat in the fourth row for the remaining 20 minutes of that seminar with her hands folded and her face completely still. And afterwards she walked back to Hiwa instead of taking the train, which is 50 minutes in October in the rain. Tasha Boudreau called her that night from Baltimore. Tasha had been her roommate through undergraduate, was now a pediatrics resident at Hopkins, and was the only person alive who was allowed to see Nyla angry. "Say it," Tasha said. "I asked a question and a man told a room I was fashionable. And the man who signs my scholarship agreed with him. So what are you going to do?" And Nyla said the sentence that decided everything that came after it. "I'm not going to be a roomer." "Say more." "If I go to the ethics office tomorrow with a story, I'm a bitter student with a grudge against her supervisor, and they'll be sorry for me. And nothing happens, and my visa is attached to my enrollment. That's what I'd be. A rumor. Something people have heard about. So I'm going to be a citation," Nyla said. "In print. With a number. That people have to cite when they cite him." Tasha was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take a year." "It's going to take 11 months, Nyla said. Because she had already looked it up. The International Congress on Clinical Instrumentation met every second year, and the next one was in Seoul in the September after next, and Muncheon was a platinum sponsor, and the opening plenary on emergency triage instrumentation was already listed. Speaker, Moon Hae-chan. 11 months. She gave herself 11 months to turn 5 notebooks under a bed into something no room could laugh at. And she set herself 2 rules that night, out loud in a one-room apartment in Hiwa with a window that faced a wall. The first was that she would not accuse anyone of anything until she could prove all of it on paper with dates. The second was that she would finish medical school regardless. Because whatever else happened, Delphine Sutton had mopped a surgical floor for 11 years, and there was going to be a doctor at the end of it. What Nyla did not know yet was how much of those 11 months she would spend being extremely polite to people she was quietly dismantling. Or that the thing which finally cracked it open would arrive from Baltimore, in a padded envelope, from a woman she had not spoken to in 7 years. The problem with the notebooks was that they proved the wrong thing. Nyla understood this within about a week of starting, and it nearly stopped her. 5 hardbound notebooks in her own handwriting prove that she did the work. They do not prove that anyone removed anything. A hostile reader would say she wrote down some numbers, and the analysis found them not significant, and now she is upset. She needed 2 things that were not hers. She needed a copy of the 19-page version that existed before publication, with a date on it that she had not put there. And she needed proof that the skin tone analysis was not a hunch she had gotten excited about, but something the study had promised to do before it ever collected a single measurement. Month 1 was spent understanding that. Month 2 she found the first one, and she found it by accident, which is how these things go. Dr. Ophelia Grier had been her undergraduate research advisor in Baltimore, was 61, taught at a state university nobody outside Maryland has heard of, and had drilled the notebook habit into 11 cohorts of students. Nyla had not spoken to her in 7 years, out of nothing worse than the ordinary shame of the person who did not keep in touch. She wrote a careful email asking a general question about authorship disputes. Ophelia wrote back in 90 minutes. "Before we discuss anything general, is this about the oximeter study? Because you emailed me a draft of that in March 5 years ago, asking me to look at your scatter plot, and I still have it. I have never deleted an email in my life. It is a character flaw." Nyla read that in the hospital cafeteria and had to put the phone face down on the table. The draft came in a padded envelope 11 days later. Because Ophelia Grier did not trust cloud storage and never would. A printed copy and a disk, and a 1-page signed and dated letter stating when she had received it, from whom, and that the copy enclosed was unaltered. 19 pages. Table 3, both figures and the full discussion section, time-stamped in a mail server 8 months before the 11-page version was ever published. Underneath it, in Ophelia's handwriting on a sticky note, "Your Axis labels were always better than mine. Call me when you're allowed to." The second document took 5 more months, and it did not come from a friend. It came from a filing cabinet. Every study on human participants at Searing goes through the Institutional Ethics Board, and the board keeps the registered protocol. And the registered protocol lists the analyses the study commits to doing before it starts. Nyla had been listed on that protocol as a study investigator, not an author, an investigator. It was the only place in the entire 5 years where her name appeared in an official capacity, and Dr. Jiu had put it there himself in year 1, for the perfectly ordinary reason that somebody had to be named as the person handling participants, which meant she could request the file. She filled in the form in November, in Korean correctly, and gave the reason as thesis documentation, which was true, and waited 7 weeks. The registered protocol was 14 pages. On page 9, under pre-specified secondary analyses, item 4, accuracy will be stratified by participant skin tone using the intake scale, with subgroup analysis of the lowest reflectance bracket. Pre-specified, registered, before the first measurement. Not a hunch. Not a fashionable question in America. A promise the study had made to an ethics board and then not kept. Nyla photographed page 9 and then sat on the floor of the archive corridor for a while with her back against the cabinet, because her legs had gone strange. She told exactly 2 people in that entire 11 months. Tasha, because Tasha would have known anyway. And her mother in a phone call in January in about 4 sentences, because Delphine Sutton had put a drive in a fireproof box 7 years earlier without asking a single question and had earned the right to know what she was keeping. "Is this going to cost you the scholarship?" Delphine said. It was not a question. "Probably. You 3 months from finishing?" 6. A long pause on a line 11,000 kilometers long. "Then you finish," said Delphine. "And then you burn it down." In that order. Nyla met Hei-chan again in February, at 2 in the morning, and it did not go the way anyone would have written it. She was on an overnight emergency rotation, and she came out of the ambulance bay for 4 minutes of air, and he was sitting on the low wall outside the department in a coat that cost more than her rent, alone with a paper cup of vending machine coffee. He looked at her, and had the decency to be embarrassed. "You're the 4th row," he said. "I'm the 4th row." He moved along the wall about a foot, which is an invitation in any country. She sat down, because she was tired, and because she had spent 5 months building a case against his company, and she wanted to know what he was. "Why are you here at 2? She said. And Moon Hei-chan told her about his brother. Moon Sun-ji had been 19. He had come into an emergency department in Daegu on a Saturday night with a headache and a fever, and he had been triaged as low acuity, and he had waited 4 hours and 10 minutes, and by the time anyone looked at him properly it was meningitis and it was very late. He was not the sickest person in that room when he walked in, Hei-chan said. He was the sickest person in that room 90 minutes later, and nobody's number changed, because nobody was measuring the right thing. So I build the things that measure. That's all I do. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist. I'm a man who buys and builds instruments so that the number on the wall is right. He drank the terrible coffee. I come here at 2 in the morning about once a month. I sit outside and I watch the queue move. It's not noble, it's just the only place I feel like the work is real. Nyla sat next to the man whose family foundation was paying her tuition and whose company's monitor read a little high on skin like hers, and listened to him explain that he had built his entire life so that the number on the wall would be right. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. When you decide a number is right, how do you check?" He almost smiled. "I read the study. And if the study's wrong, then everything I've done is wrong," Hachin said. "Which is why I read it twice." And he took out the black notebook and wrote something down. And Nayla watched him do it. And something in her chest went sideways in a way she did not have time for and was not going to admit to for another 8 months. Then she went back inside and worked until 7. The near disaster came in April, and it came because a filing system did what filing systems do. Every request to the ethics archive generates a notification to the study's principal investigator. Dr. Ju Jin-woo received an automated email 7 weeks late, telling him that investigator N. Sutton had requested the full registered protocol for a study that had concluded 5 years earlier. He did not shout, and he did not confront her, because he was not a stupid man. What he did was raise a concern. Chan Dare found out first, because Dare was 26, worked in the lab, was the only person there who had ever gone out of her way to speak to Nayla, and had the specific radar of a junior person who survives by knowing what is coming. She caught Nayla in a stairwell. "Someone put a note in your file," Dare said in Korean, fast, quietly. Professionalism concern. "It came from Dr. Jiu's office." "I am not supposed to know this. Thank you, Nayla. Your thesis committee is Dr. Jiu, Dr. Beek and Dr. Lim. I know who my committee is. He chairs it." "I know." Dare looked at her for a moment. "Whatever you are doing, do it faster." 8 days later, Nayla was invited to a meeting with Wi So-hyun. Wi So-hyun was 34, was counsel for the Moon Foundation, and was extremely good at a job that consists almost entirely of making problems smaller before anyone important hears about them. The meeting was in a nice room with tea. "There is nothing wrong," Wi So-hyun said, first thing, which is the sentence people use when there is something wrong. "This is a routine conversation about the terms of your award." She turned a page. "Recipients agree to conduct themselves in a manner that does not bring the foundation into disrepute. It is standard language. Every scholarship has it." "I know," said Nayla. "It has been suggested to me that you are preparing something regarding prior work of one of our affiliated laboratories." Nayla did not answer. "I want to be very clear that nobody has instructed me to say anything to you." "Want to be very said. I asked to meet you myself. Because if you are preparing something and it is wrong, they will end your award and your visa follows your enrollment, and you will be on a plane before anyone reads it." She poured tea neither of them drank. "And if it is right," she said, "you should not be preparing it alone, and you should not be preparing it here." Nayla looked at her for a long moment and understood 2 things at once, that Wi So-hyun had guessed most of it, and that Wi So-hyun was not entirely on the other side. "Thank you for the tea," she said. She walked out of that building with her hands perfectly steady and was sick in a stairwell on the 2nd floor. Then she rinsed her face, went to her afternoon clinic, and saw 14 patients. The cost of that spring was one thing, and she paid it in May. A trauma fellowship in Bizen offered her a research post starting after graduation, funded. Prestigious, exactly the thing she had come to that country to earn. The application required a reference from her thesis chair. Nayla read the form 3 times, and then closed it, and did not apply and never told anyone she had not applied. Because a reference request from Dr. Ju Jin-woo in May was a conversation with Dr. Ju Jin-woo in May, and she had 4 months left. What she did not know, sitting on the floor of her room in Hua with an unsubmitted application on a laptop, was that 4 floors above the office where she had drunk no tea, a woman named Moon Ae-ryung had already read the note in her file, and had decided, quite calmly, that the simplest solution was for the American student to not be a student anymore. Moon Ae-ryung was 58, ran the pharmaceutical and device arm of the Moon Group, and had put her nephew in charge of Moon Chanbyo for reasons that were 80% affection and 20% the fact that he was easy to root around. She read the note in Nayla Sutton's file on a Tuesday and understood the whole shape of it in under a minute, which is what makes people like her dangerous. She did not care whether the American student was right. She had been in that industry for 31 years, and she knew that being right is a fact and being timed is a strategy. And a correction 11 weeks before an international congress where your company is the platinum sponsor is not a scientific event. It is a share price event. So she did 2 things and neither of them was illegal. In June, the Moon Foundation informed Nayla Sutton by letter that her scholarship would not be renewed for the final term, citing a routine review of continuing eligibility. And in the same week, the medical school moved her thesis defense forward by 7 weeks, to the last day of August for scheduling reasons. 12 days before the Congress. Nayla read both letters in the same afternoon, sitting on the steps outside the library, and did the arithmetic. The tuition for her final term had been dispersed in March, which meant she was still enrolled and her visa still held. They could not remove her. They could only make sure that on the day she needed to be a doctor, she would be standing in a room in front of a committee chaired by Dr. Ju Jin-woo. Pass, and she graduated with 11 days to spare. Fail, and she was not a student. And a person who is not a student has 30 days in that country, and the Congress was in 12. That's not a coincidence, said Tasha on the phone, at 4 a.m. Baltimore time. No, Nayla, that's a gun to your head. It's a gun to my head held by a scheduling office, Nayla said. Which is the only kind they use. Moon Hae-chan came to find her in July, and he came alone. And he had the notebook in his hand when he arrived, which she noticed before anything else. He had used it. That was the thing. Sometime after the seminar in October, he had gone home and written down the question he had refused to let her ask. And then, in the way of a man who has done that for 18 years, he had gone and found out. It had taken him 9 months because he had started from the wrong end. He had gone to the journal version, and the journal version was clean. And it was only when he pulled the acknowledgments that he found 4 words that stopped him. The lab thanks in Sutton. He stood in the corridor outside a teaching room in Sarin and said, I owe you an apology from October, and I would like to make it properly. But I want to ask you one thing first. Ask, how many pages was it? 19. Hae-chan closed his eyes for a second. Show me, he said. She showed him. Not in a corridor. In the reading room, over 2 hours, with the print copy from Baltimore and Ophelia Grier's signed letter and page 9 of the registered protocol laid out on a table in the order she had rehearsed 100 times in her head. Moon Hae-chan read all of it, slowly, the way he read everything and did not interrupt once. And when he got to the pre-specified secondary analysis, he read that page 3 times. Then he sat back. 11,000 beds, he said. 11,000 in some. And the failure is at the edges. Low perfusion. Which is triage. Which is triage, Nayla said. He was quiet for a long time. My brother was not triaged wrong because of a device, he said finally. There was no device. There was a tired nurse in a full room. I know the difference. I am not going to sit here and pretend this is about him. But I have spent 18 years telling people that the number on the wall is the thing you can trust. And I have been selling a number that is a little bit kinder to some people than to others. And I did not know, and not knowing is not a defense. It is just the description of what happened. Then he said the thing she had been waiting for and dreading. Give it to me. Hae-chan. Listen, I can do this in 6 weeks. I will have Moon-chan issue a field notice. I will fund the restudy, properly powered with your protocol. I will have the authorship corrected. I have the leverage to make you agree, because his lab is ours. Your name goes first. It goes first, publicly, and I will say it myself. And nobody has to be humiliated in a room in September. It was, Nayla understood, an entirely genuine offer, and it would have worked. And it was the most generous thing anyone had ever put in front of her. No, she said. He stared at her. Why? Because if you fix it, it's a memo. She turned the 11-page paper around on the table so it faced him. This is cited 240 times. It's in the regulatory file. It's in 3 national guidelines. Every one of those documents points here. If Moon-chan issues a field notice, that's a company doing PR. And in 18 months it's a footnote nobody clicks. And this paper, this one, the 11-page one, is still sitting there clean, being cited forever. The only thing that reaches all 240 is a correction on the paper itself. Then every database flags it. Every person who cites it from that day forward gets a warning on the screen. That's not a press release. That's plumbing. I don't want your apology in a room. I want a line of metadata that outlives both of us. Hae-chan looked at the paper for a long moment. So what do you want from me? Nothing, Nayla said. Genuinely nothing. I want you to give the plenary exactly as you were going to give it. You want me to walk out and quote your own stolen paper at 300 people. Yes. Why? Because a correction from the sponsor is charity, she said. And a correction from the floor is a record. And because I have spent 11 months making sure that when I stand up, I am not a rumor. He did not argue for long. He was not built for arguing. He wrote something in the notebook and closed it and said, "Then I will not warn my aunt, and I will not change one slide." And then, after a pause, "And if they fail you at that defense, I will burn the entire foundation down, and that is not a favor. That is just what I will do." "Understood," said Nayla. The thesis defense was on the 31st of August at 9 in the morning in room 4 South, and it ran for 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is about an hour longer than they usually run. Nayla had made one decision about that thesis in April and had never reconsidered it. A doctoral thesis is not a paper. It is a document deposited in a university library, cataloged, dated, and permanently citable by anyone. So she had put all of it in. All 19 pages as an appendix with the raw stratified tables, both original figures. The registered protocol page 9 reproduced in full, and a methods note stating plainly and without adjectives, which analyses had been pre-specified and which appeared in the published version. No accusation anywhere. Not one sentence of grievance. Just the documents, side by side in an appendix with dates. Dr. Ji Jin Woo chaired that committee and read that appendix. He asked her 40 minutes of questions about statistical power, and she answered all of them because she had run the study and he had not. At the end, he was silent for a while, and then he asked the only real question he asked all morning. "Why did you put the appendix in?" "Because it's my data," said Nayla. "And this is the first document in 5 years that I'm allowed to sign." The committee passed her. It was not close, and it was not generous. She had simply done the work, and there were 2 other people in the room besides Jiu, and one of them, Dr. Lim, asked twice why the tables were not in the published version and did not get an answer either time. Nyla Sutton walked out of room 4 South at 11:40 on the 31st of August as a physician, with no job, no scholarship, 310,001 in her account, and a thesis in the university catalog with a permanent identifier. She spent 90,000 of the 310 on a single-day delegate pass to the International Congress on Clinical Instrumentation. Standing room. No affiliation printed on the badge, because she did not have one anymore. Just her name. What she did not know, buying that pass on a laptop in a room in Hua with a window that faced a wall, was that 4 days earlier her thesis had been indexed. And that indexing meant that when 300 people in a hall reached for their phones, the 19 pages would already be there waiting, with a date on them that was older than the argument. The International Congress on Clinical Instrumentation opened on the 9th of September in a convention center in Samsung-dong, and the plenary on emergency triage instrumentation was at 9:40 on the second morning, in the main hall, which seats a little over 300. Nyla Sutton was in the standing area at the back, behind the last row, against the wall, with a delegate badge that had no affiliation printed on it. She had not slept. She had a folder under her arm with 4 documents in it, and she had rehearsed 11 sentences until they had stopped meaning anything, which is the only way you know they are ready. Moon Ae-ryung sat in the second row on the aisle. Moon Hae-chan gave the talk exactly as he had said he would. He did not change one slide, and he did not look at the back of the room, and he was very good, because he was always very good. He talked about cues. He talked about the 4 hours and 10 minutes in a way that made the room go quiet, without ever saying that it was his brother. And at slide 14 he put up the accuracy data. It was her scatter plot. Redrawn, relabeled, in company colors, cropped along the bottom, exactly as it had been on a corridor display board 17 months earlier. And Moon Hae-chan read out the caption in English to 300 and some people from 31 countries. Device performance validated against arterial reference across patient populations. Which is why the protocol can be trusted at the point of triage. Nayla Sutton stood up. There is a particular sound a room makes when someone stands up in the standing area, which is not a sound at all. It is the absence of one. A runner in a Congress polo shirt came down the side aisle with a radio microphone, because that is what runners are for, and handed it to her before anybody senior had time to decide whether that was a good idea. "Dr. Moon," she said. Her voice went out over 300 people and it was completely level. The study you are citing is 19 pages. The version in your regulatory file is 11. The moderator, a Belgian professor who had been enjoying a very ordinary morning, leaned into his microphone and said something about holding questions. Hei Chen raised one hand off the lectern, about 4 inches. Let her finish, he said. The moderator sat back. Page 19, said Nayla. Table 3. The stratified accuracy data by skin tone, and the subgroup analysis of the lowest reflectance bracket. Neither of them is in the published paper. The figure on your slide is that data with the bottom bracket cropped out of the image. Somebody in the 4th row said something in Korean to the person next to them. The skin tone stratification was not an afterthought, Nayla said. It was pre-specified. It is item 4 on page 9 of the protocol registered with the Syrian Institutional Ethics Board before the study collected a single measurement. The study promised to do that analysis. The analysis was done. It is not in the paper. Moon Aryung stood up in the 2nd row. This is not the forum. Sit down, said Moon Hei-chan. He said it quietly, into a live microphone, to his own aunt, in front of 300 people, and it was the single most expensive sentence of his life. She sat down. Go on, he said to the back of the room. And Nayla Sutton said the 11 words she had been rehearsing since April. I ran that study. I wrote those 19 pages. My name is in the acknowledgements. She let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. Then she gave them the identifier. Not the paper. Her thesis, deposited, catalogued, indexed 4 days earlier, with a permanent number that anybody in that hall could type into a phone. The full 19 pages are in Appendix C, she said, with the registered protocol reproduced. It has been public since the 27th of August. You do not have to take my word for any of this. You can read it right now. 300 people reached for their phones at the same time. There is no sound in the world quite like that either. For about 40 seconds, nobody in that hall said anything at all. And the only thing happening was several hundred screens loading the same document. Then a woman in the 6th row, a Norwegian intensivist whose name Nayla never learned, said loudly, to nobody, "Oh, it's the whole table. It's just, the whole table is here." Moon Hei-chan turned around and looked at slide 14 for a moment. Then he turned back to the microphone. Can we put 14 back up, please? He said. And leave it up. The technician put it up. This figure is cropped, Hei-chan said. I did not crop it. I have been showing it for 2 years in this country and 5 others, and I did not check it. And only one of those 2 facts is a defense. And it is not the one people will want to give me. He took the black notebook out of his inside pocket, opened it, and wrote something down at the lectern in front of 300 people, which about half the room found completely baffling and which one person at the back understood entirely. Munchinbeo will support a full correction to the published paper, he said, not a company statement. A correction on the record, through the journal, with the original authorship restored and the stratified data included. And the plenary is finished. I am not going to stand here and take questions about a slide I should have read properly. He picked up his folder and walked off the stage. Nayla handed the microphone back to a 19-year-old runner who looked as if he had just watched a building fall down. Then she walked out of the hall, down a corridor, through a fire door, and sat on the 3rd step of a concrete stairwell that smelled of paint. And she came apart. Not for long. About 40 seconds with both hands over her face, in a stairwell alone, which is where she had done every other important thing in 11 months. Then she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and looked at her watch, and did the time zone arithmetic she had been doing since she was 25. It was 3 in the morning in Baltimore. Delphine Sutton picked up on the 2nd ring because she had been awake because she had known what day it was. Well, said her mother. I said it, said Nayla. I said all of it. And he put my slide back up and told them he should have read it properly. There was a sound on the other end of the line that was not a word. Mama, I'm here, baby. I'm just, hold on. And 11,000 kilometers away, a 58-year-old woman who had mopped a surgical floor for 11 years sat down on the edge of her bed at 3 in the morning and cried, And her daughter sat on a concrete step in Samsung-dong and listened to her do it. And neither of them said anything for about a minute and a half. Corrections are slow, and this is the part nobody puts in a film. The journal took 4 months. It took 4 months because a correction of that size requires the editors to obtain the original data, verify the registered protocol, contact every listed author, and give each of them the opportunity to respond. And one of them fought it for 11 weeks. Dr. Ju Jin-woo's position in writing was that the removal of the stratified tables had been an editorial decision made for length, that the finding had been judged exploratory, and that the omission was a matter of scientific judgment rather than misconduct. That position survived exactly as long as it took the editors to read page 9 of the registered protocol, because a pre-specified analysis is not exploratory by definition, and the definition is not a matter of opinion. The correction notice was published in January. Sutton, listed first. And because it was a correction on the paper itself and not a press release, the databases did what databases do. Every index flagged the original. Every one of the 241 documents that cited it acquired a small orange marker. 3 national guideline committees received automated alerts. Plumbing. The regulator reopened the device file in February and required the accuracy labeling to be revised and the low perfusion performance to be re-established across skin tone brackets. Munchin Bio funded that restudy, properly powered, using the original registered protocol. And the protocol had one name on it as principal investigator, and it was not Dr. Jiu's. W. Hyun turned out to have been quietly on the right side of it for longer than anyone knew. When the ethics review began, she produced a memo she had written 8 months earlier, addressed to Moon A-ryung, advising in careful legal language that ending a scholarship recipient's award while she had an open documentation request was, in Woo So-hyun's professional opinion, indefensible. The memo had been ignored. The memo had also been filed in triplicate by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She resigned in March and now teaches research ethics at a university in Daejeon, which pays less than half of what she used to make. Dr. Ju Jin-woo kept his chair for 9 months and then did not. He was not disgraced in any dramatic way. There was no scene. His grant renewals were declined. 2 students transferred out of his lab, and he took an early retirement that was described in the departmental newsletter as a decision to focus on writing. Moon A-ryung stepped back from the device division in the spring. She sent Naila one message through a lawyer 6 weeks after the Congress. It was 4 lines and contained no apology. The last line said, "You were correct, and you are also 9% of my year's operating margin. I would like you to understand that both of those were true at the same time." Naila did not reply. Some things are just information. Naila Sutton is an emergency medicine resident now. Not in Bizen and not at Siren. At a public hospital in Incheon with a chronically full department and a triage board on the wall that she looks at more carefully than most people, and she is very good. And her attendings say she is unusually calm in the first 10 minutes of a bad shift, which is when it counts. Moon Hae-chan waited 11 months after the correction was published before he asked her to dinner, because he had worked out correctly that any earlier would have made her a story about him. She said yes on the second asking. He still writes things in the notebook. He is on number 44. She has read exactly 1 page of it, once, on the flight to Baltimore to meet her mother. And what was written on that page was a question in his handwriting, dated the previous October, which said, "Why did I take the professor's word over the woman who ran the experiment?" Find out. Underneath it, in different ink, months later, 4 words. Because it was easier. Delphine Sutton retired in the spring. Her daughter would not permit any other outcome. Ophelia Grier, who has never deleted an email in her life, was second author on the restudy, and made a very great deal of noise about not deserving it, and was overruled. People ask Naila now what she would tell someone whose work has been taken. She never says fight, and she never says let it go. She says, get a copy of it out of the building. Email it to someone. Post it. Put it in a thesis. Put it anywhere with a date on it that isn't a date you control. Because they can argue with your memory and they cannot argue with a timestamp. And then she says the other thing, which is the part people write down. An apology dies with the person who owes it. A correction doesn't. Build the thing that outlives the argument. If Nayla's story reminded you of work of yours that has somebody else's name on it, or of a room where you decided it wasn't worth the trouble, this is where that gets to matter. Subscribe if this channel has earned a place in your feed, and stay close. Because there are more women like Nala whose stories deserve to be told. And I want to ask you something specific. In July, Moon Haechan sat across a table from her and offered to fix all of it in 6 weeks, her name restored. The study refunded, the correction made, and nobody humiliated in a room in front of 300 people. She said no, and she waited 11 more weeks. And she did it from the floor with no affiliation on her badge. Would you have taken the 6 weeks? Or would you have waited for the room? There is no wrong answer, and I genuinely want to know where you land, and why. Drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next story.